Hello, hello, and welcome back to Shelf Talks, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of female founders bringing their product based businesses to retail shelves. I'm your host, Roberta, and today I'm joined by Denise Woodard, the founder of Partake Foods. What started as a mom's mission to create allergy friendly snacks for her daughter has grown into a brand on shelves nationwide, might I add, in over 18,000 retailers across the country. Denise is breaking barriers, building community, and showing founders what's possible. And I am super excited to have her here and to learn more. Welcome, Denise.
Thanks, Roberta. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more of your story. And I think let's just dive in.
Sounds like a plan.
So, what was life like before even thinking about creating and starting Partake?
Sure. Life way earlier was growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Grew up in a house where my parents hadn't graduated from high school, and it was very much instilled upon me like education is the most important thing. Go to corporate America, get a stable job, and here I am. But I spent a good portion of my career after graduating from the University of North Carolina in corporate America, and most of the time at Coca-Cola. And in my last role at Coca-Cola, I had a chance to be the director of sales for the food service and on-premise portion of our venturing and emerging brands platform. So I was working with high growth, mission-oriented beverage brands that Coca-Cola had invested in or acquired.
Did a lot of that time period have you thinking about doing something on your own, or were you always one that had a vision of being an entrepreneur?
So my dad's an entrepreneur. He was in the US Army, and then after leaving the Army became an over-the-road truck driver, eventually saved up enough money to buy his own truck and start a small trucking company. And so I had seen entrepreneurship, and I think that's why my parents were so gung-ho about me not being an entrepreneur, because they knew how stressful it could be, and I wanted no parts of it. But I think I couldn't shake my entrepreneurial spirit. Throughout the time that I worked in corporate America, I always had a side hustle. I had an eBay business that was bringing in six figures. I had a ticket brokering business. I always had like this little
Oh, wow.
janky side hustle, but never anything that I was like passionate enough about or had enough belief in that I would ever leave my like stable corporate career, which I was enjoying. But I will say to answer your question, seeing those other founders building companies, solving problems, having a positive impact on the world did start to give me glimmers of like maybe I could do something with this. I had no idea or nothing that I was passionate about though until my daughter came along.
So what was that story? What made you even think about Partake specifically?
So, as someone who grew up with no dietary restrictions, no food allergies, I eat all the things. Food allergies were not on my radar. My now 10-year-old daughter, Vivian, right around her first birthday, we learned that she had quite a few food allergies. She's allergic to tree nuts, eggs, and sesame. We were living in New York City at the time, and I had access to like amazing grocery stores and markets, and I was still coming up empty handed and really frustrated with the options that existed that she could safely eat. And it was actually at the urging of our nanny, Martha, who was like, "You're helping all these other people in your day job build their business. Why don't you just create something for yourself?" And so Martha has equity in the business to this day, but it was really her kick in the butt alongside my daughter's journey with food allergies that prompted me to start Partake.
That's amazing, and it's great because it sounds like you definitely still had, like, the entrepreneurial, like, journey growing up through your adulthood, of course, with your jobs, but then, like, identifying something, to your point, that you're super passionate that you're like, "Let me really go after this in a big way."
That's always my feedback to entrepreneurs. Like the journey is so hard. You have to have something that you are so passionate about. It can't just be, I want to be famous or I think entrepreneurship is glamorous. It's
Yeah,
not. It has to be something that you just believe so deeply in and that you believe the world needs, because I think that's what sustains you through the tough days.
yeah. So then what was first steps once Martha pushed you towards starting something here and creating your own? What were the first steps in creating that?
So for me, it felt like for me to leave this job that I love so much, I need to know what I'm going to make, where I'm going to make it, and how I'm going to make it. I didn't really know the answers to any of that. I had worked heavily in sales, so I understood the sales aspect, but this was, 100 steps before that. And so a lot of it was reaching out to other founders or reaching out to founders in the industry, having informational calls with people to understand like what is a contract manufacturer, what is a commercial kitchen, what does that look like in terms of like taking a product from a kitchen to actual store shelves. And then I would be lying if I said I knew how to bake anything. And so I needed to find someone to help me bring the product to life. And so that was a lot of trial and error of like, could a recipe blogger online be the person to help? And I started over time through these conversations learning that, there's food scientists that exist that like create products that are commercializable, that are meant to be on store shelves. And so finding someone that could actually help bring that vision to life and figuring out where to make the product, I think those were the two first steps that I took.
Did you already know from the onset that you wanted to start with a cookie?
I did not. Actually really wanted to start with a graham cracker. I wanted to start with crackers. And as I started trying to find a contract manufacturer, one of the most challenging things about having an allergy friendly food company is to stay true to our mission. It was really important to me that we were in a top 8 allergen free facility. There's not very many that existed. And I didn't have the money to be able to buy equipment to make whatever I felt like making. And so I found a group, I convinced them to work with us, and they were like, well, we can do baking mixes or we can do cookies. And so cookies it was. Yeah. And I think that's other like feedback I give to entrepreneurs. It's never going to be perfect, or likely it's not going to be perfect from day one. You got to work with what you got and like use that to get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah. And eventually you did launch crackers, right?
Yeah.
So it could
Yes.
still
8
happen.
years later.
So with that, when they said, okay, cookies we can make, and you said it's a go, how long was that process in trying to create what you were looking for with the, allergen free coupled with making a great tasting cookie?
So it was June 1st, 2016, when I incorporated Partake Foods as an LLC. We called it Vivi's Life because I didn't know exactly what we were going to do other than make my daughter Vivi's life easier. So we incorporated in June of 2016. I left my job at Coca-Cola in August of 2017 with boxes of cookies ready to be sold. So it took about a year.
And then with those boxes, what was your initial strategy in selling them? Did you start off D2C?
Not exactly. It was direct in some aspect. Directly out of the back of my car is how I sold the product. Like, I think sometimes like I would try to overcomplicate things and like add all this sophistication that probably didn't make sense for the early stages of the business. And so for me to figure out what stores we were going to go into, I literally just looked at the store locator for all of my competitors and said, okay, well, these stores must think there's a market for allergy friendly products. And so that's how I created my list. We were living in New York at the time, and thankfully that's a market where there's a ton of independent stores. I was scared to make any mistake that I couldn't afford to recover from. And so for me, that meant like, I can't go into a distributor early. I can't hire anybody. I need to just like do every job myself and make sure I understand how this works and like make sure that somebody else besides me thinks there's a business here. And so we were fortunate that we lived across the street from a climate controlled storage unit in Jersey City. I had a pallet of cookies delivered to that storage unit. I hand unloaded it, and then every day I would just go to stores around New York trying to sell the products in.
Wow. So what was your pitch going into those stores? How did you convince them to put something so new on shelf?
There was a wide range of how easy to how difficult it would be. But my max pitch was I was going to help them sell the products. Even if they didn't want to give it a try, like I was just going to come back and demo. And I was like, I will keep demoing until you sell every one of these boxes of cookies. Because for me, that was also a really valuable opportunity to get to meet the consumer and hear what they thought about the product, why they were choosing to buy the product. And so our initial marketing strategy was just all demo. So the toughest thing, right? Tough is probably not the right word, but the hardest thing I had to do to sell the product in was agree to come back and make sure that it sold. I think particularly being in New York, there were so many of the store owners and bodega owners who I think just appreciated the hustle. And so when I would tell them like I left this corporate job to now like be standing here in your bodega with a backpack and some cookies, like I think they just felt sorry for me, honestly.
Well, I think that's actually a good note just in regards to you saying, I'm going to come back and I'm going to demo and I'm going to talk to consumers and educate, because just having your product on shelf, especially with no, history behind it, really just the onset of creating it, it's hard to get that consumer to trial.
Yep, agree completely. I think the whole getting off the shelf is much harder, proved to be much harder than getting on the store shelves.
Yeah. So what was early feedback when you were in those stores and demoing? What were customers saying?
So lots of key learnings that have held true in the business for several years. One, I created the company to create a solution for people who were managing food allergies and dietary restrictions. When I did the demos, what I learned and should have known being a food allergy mom, there's a really high barrier to entry with that consumer. I have to like know where this product's being made and do I trust this company? And so as much as people were like, oh, that's a really cute idea. My kid has an allergy. I don't know you from Adam. I'm not giving them this product. And so I think understanding like how many people beyond those with food allergies would be willing to be consumers of the product. For me, it was really eye-opening to see how many consumers who were just looking for better for you products, or maybe their children didn't have food allergies, but they needed something that was school safe. And so it really opened my eyes to how much broader of a business this could be. I also had done some like very like basic focus group work, which was I sent a survey monkey to 10 mom friends, and then I asked them to each send it to 10 mom friends until I got to 300 people who had completed it. And one thing that was holding true was like people wanted their kids to eat more vegetables. And so I had the bright idea to come out with flavor names like sweet potato millet and carrot oat cookies. And what I realized is that when people want cookies and they want to indulge, they want to indulge. And so when I would say the flavor names, people would look like, but then they would try the product and they would say, oh, well, this tastes like a snickerdoodle or this tastes like a ginger snap. And so over time, a short period of time, we renamed the products. And then the packaging that we originally came out with was like craft paper brown. It had all these icons that said like no eggs, no nuts. And I would tell this very vibrant, warm, inclusive story about how I wanted everyone to be able to partake. And then they would look at the packaging and they would say, like, your packaging does not match the story you're telling me. And if you weren't here telling me the story, I would never buy this product. It's so lots of really valuable learnings.
Yeah. So you immediately shifted and pivoted to get those learnings onto package, or did that take some time?
It took some time primarily because of budget constraint. And I think this is something I see even to this day. I don't think we properly, for me, I didn't properly think through the time for something to flow through. Like, you already have all this packaging on hand that you've purchased, so you don't want that to go to waste. And then, the store, unless you're delivering the product directly to the store, when there's a distributor involved, like it takes a while for it to flow through onto store shelves. And so, I think somebody might have a really great idea to improve the packaging, but it often takes so long to be able to actually show up on the store shelves. And for us, I started getting this feedback in 2017. It wasn't till June of 2019 that we started putting new packaging on shelves, which probably honestly did us a disservice, but we just didn't have the money to make the
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah. At least you were getting that feedback with a plan to do it at some
Yep.
point when you were ready. So you started off in New York area in those local stores. When did you feel, or what was that next step in going bigger and getting into those bigger retailers?
So at that point, we were in stores in New York, and Whole Foods felt like the holy grail. Every potential investor I talked to, they were like, well, are you in Whole Foods? How are you performing in Whole Foods? And so I made it my mission to try to figure out how to get into Whole Foods. I had no connections, no introductions, nothing. I cold LinkedIn messaged every person on LinkedIn who had category manager in their title. Thankfully, someone who was working out of the Rocky Mountain buying office took pity on me and said, I think this could be a fit for the Southwest region, and connected me to the buyer for Whole Foods Southwest region who was willing to give us a shot. At the same time, I was seeing that our product was turning well in the New York market, and Wegmans is a key retailer in that area. And so I was also pitching Wegmans. And so in the summer of 2018, about a year after we launched, we went into 43 Whole Foods stores across Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. And we also went into a subset of Wegmans stores.
Okay. And so how was that experience? Let's take Whole Foods, for example. You were able to connect to that buyer. What were next steps with that? Did you have an official pitch meeting?
No, it was actually all done via email, and we weren't even in COVID times yet. And so, it's amazing how much you can get done. Like somebody will ask if I'm working, like anytime I have my laptop with me, you could get a lot done from
Yeah, anywhere.
without, yep. And so I managed the whole process virtually. For Whole Foods, I think they felt like there was a need to bring in a new, better for you, allergy-friendly brand. I think our story resonated. I think the ingredient deck and the product samples resonated. And that meant we had to open up a distribution partner. So we went from just being distributed out of my car to working with an actual distributor. And, I was really bullish on accounts like Whole Foods and Wegmans because demos were such an important part of how they went to market too. And I knew that worked for us. And I knew I didn't really have a very sophisticated marketing strategy outside of have demos. And so thankfully, my brother-in-law lives in the Texas market and was willing to help us out with some demos. And that is like the marketing strategy that we utilize alongside promotions to be able to be successful in Whole Foods.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Because that was my next question. Since demoing was so key in New York, what happened when it was in Texas? But it sounded like you had somebody
Good
that was able to
brother-in-law.
support that.
Yeah.
So, was there any different feedback that you were getting once you were in Wegmans and Whole Foods versus the consumer feedback that you were getting from those New York stores?
Honestly, no. And it was important for me to also get outside of like the coastal New York market because I wanted to hear from a consumer that wasn't just in New York or LA or Austin. And honestly, the feedback resonated the same at Wegmans, at Whole Foods Southwest, as it had in those New York City independents.
That's good. You didn't have to change anything else in
Thankfully.
regards to it wasn't because
Yeah,
sometimes I guess you could have a different perspective from consumers in a specific region of the country versus others and the
for
needs
sure.
and the customers in those different stores. So once you were on shelf, and especially going into so many additional retailers, how were you able to manage inventory to make sure that you're building proper inventory for not only that initial delivery, but also for replenishment?
So, our first hire didn't join us until January of 2020, which meant we were on store shelves of Whole Foods and Wegmans for about a year and a half with me as the only employee. And I just had some like very rudimentary Excel spreadsheets that I built. And I am definitely not the most like quantitative math inclined person, but I was just trying to keep it as basic as possible. Like you could see the data. I also appreciated that Whole Foods and Wegmans are both retailers where there's a data portal and you can see what you're selling. And so I was able to calculate velocity and, well, I made this many cookies and this many got picked up and this is how many are selling. So, like, directionally, I think this is how many I need to make more. I think for me, that's also why it's really important if you don't have a tremendous amount of capital resource to start as small as possible. Like the stakes were much smaller. I wanted to service those customers on time and in full. And at the same time, like we weren't talking massive numbers. We weren't talking thousands of pallets. And so it was manageable and like it could make sense for me to just work that on an Excel spreadsheet as a team of one.
Yeah. Did you see any difference in regards to how you projected priority flavor versus how it actualized?
You know? Surprisingly, no. I think for cookies, chocolate chip is queen, king, whatever you want to call it. And so we saw that in the data. I think I also saw kind of the 80-20 rule play out in terms of like, a small segment of SKUs is going to make up the bulk of your sales and your assortment. And so there were no surprises there. And, there was definitely some regional variation as the business grew. And we saw that like ginger snap was really popular in the Southeast, whereas like lemon was really popular on the West Coast. And so there was some nuance there, but I think in terms of the top couple of SKUs, those remained constant anywhere in the country for
Yeah.
us.
What about marketing? I know you said, core was sampling, but what were some other marketing channels that, performed well for you? Or also, what are things that maybe you tried and it didn't work?
So things that worked well for us from a marketing perspective in the earliest of days, I joined like literally, I'm still a part of them, embarrassingly, all of these mom groups on Facebook across the country in every market we were. That we were operating in, and I would look for free opportunities. And I remember in New Orleans particularly, there was these mom groups that would host events, and I would just send down sample product for these events that they were hosting and things like that. So I took a really grassroots sampling approach. Even when we weren't doing demos, it was like, how do we sample at local events, particularly when I didn't have a field marketing team, when I wasn't able to be in the market. So we were just like shipping samples. So we did that. One of the things that didn't feel as prominent then, or maybe I just wasn't in the loop, but that we utilize now a lot more is the bulk of our marketing budget goes to paid digital. So whether that be Instacart, whether that be retailer specific media platforms like Walmart or Kroger performance marketing, that's where a lot of our dollars are going because you can really track the ROI. And with our consumer base, we find that we over index with consumers who are shopping online for our products. And so we spend a lot there on digital. I think things that haven't worked for us, we're really fortunate. We have some celebrity investors. Jay-Z's venture fund, Marcy Venture Partners, is an investor in the business. Rihanna's an investor in the business. And we've had celebrities over time post about Partake. And I remember I used to get so excited once I called our head of marketing when a celebrity had posted. It's like, you have to make sure the website is going to be able to hold all of this. And like, we got like a $200 blip in sales. And so, I've heard like amazing stories from other brands about like things like, I had this one post and it went viral. For me, it hasn't really ever been like a virality thing. It's just been like kind of slow and steady wins the race, and like this like very holistic approach. I don't think we can necessarily turn anything off. I think, having grassroots and having brand ambassadors and having a digital component and having showing up on social and having an email correspondence, like for me, it feels like all of those things have to be working in tandem to really kind of power the business.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. You can't just focus on one avenue,
Mm,
because you can even have success on that and then at some point that dip down. But if you have all of
yep,
those going, there's opportunity to continue the success.
for sure.
I know you talked a minute about the name change from
From Vivi's Life. So we never
yeah.
went to market with that name. I just created the
Oh, okay.
LLC, but I was like, I know we are going to need a different name. So we never
Oh,
went to
okay.
market with a
Okay.
different name.
Got it. Okay. So Partake was always the name.
Yep, from day one.
Great. So then as you're kind of in these local markets growing, and then you launched in Target, right? How did that come to be?
So we were in about 350 stores. So we had expanded beyond New York. We were in Wegmans, we were in Whole Foods. We had started to build in regional retailers like Central Market in the Texas market, or King's Balducci's in the Northeast. And then I dragged my husband to Expo West with me
You
in
dragged him?
2017. I dragged him because I didn't want to just go by myself. And, he works in finance, so like totally different industry. But I was like, I need somebody else to go with me. And so we had Ziploc products. That was in 2017. We hadn't even officially launched the business at that point. And I said, if you see anybody from Target or Whole Foods, because those are my dream retailers, like stop them anywhere. And he found the then head of supplier diversity for Target in the bathroom line and gave them the samples. And that is how we met them. And they, really honestly, to their credit, did a lot to nurture the brand. They invited us to their Black owned business fair in 2018. They really helped us understand a roadmap of like what they would need to see for them to consider us for their store shelves. And honestly, I just worked to execute against that roadmap. And we met for a category review in 2018. And they were like, you're not ready yet. This is what we need to see. And then we met again in 2019. And at the end of 2019, after we met, I was like, this meeting went well. I think we can maybe get a small test. And we got a phone call in February of 2020, I would say it was, maybe January 2020. And they wanted us in nearly every store in the country. And so it really was kind of a bet the company moment, because it was just me and one other employee. We hadn't really raised a lot of money. And so we had to choose, like, are we going to go all in on this, or is this not the right time? And we went all in.
Yeah, you went all in. What made you go all in though, especially hearing how you were saying, starting small and building to that? What made that moment say to you, this is the time?
I had really experienced a deep sense of partnership from them. Like, it was 3 years at that point of like, working with them and understanding their buying team. And I felt like we would have some support there. I think making decisions with data is important, but I also think having a good dose of listening to your intuition is also important, particularly on an entrepreneurial journey. And I just felt in my gut like we should do it. I wanted to make sure my ducks were in a row. I looked at the bank account and looked at what the PO financing and like, could we afford to do this? So I wanted to make sure that was true. And then I called our manufacturing partner. I'm like, can you ramp up and can we do this together? So I didn't say yes on the spot. I said, can I think about it? And then I made those frantic phone calls. And then I called back very quickly and said yes.
So with that manufacturer, calling them, had you already determined that the manufacturer that you were working with was able to scale up to the way that you kind of had your dreams set on those bigger retailers?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that like is a blessing and a curse, because there's not very many allergy-friendly manufacturers. There was no like really small group that I could go to and then grow into somebody else. So like this group had to be willing to take a chance on me when I was probably too small to be in their facility. And I also needed to be willing to say, do I believe that I'm going to be able to scale this business and grow into the size customer that they need me to be?
Yeah. So from the time that you got the yes, well, the time you said yes, I can do it, and the time that you were actually on store shelves, what did that timing look like?
So that was a weird time, I think, for everybody, because that was like January 2020 to May of 2020. And so I think what was happening during that period. And so we were launching an in-store retailer when nobody was really in stores. So it was tricky. But yeah, we launched in Target nationwide in May of 2020. And so for us, it was understanding what the launch plan would be. What are the levers that we're going to use from from a marketing perspective. What's our promo plan going to be? And just making sure that we had all of our ducks in a row so that we could press play the day that we hit the store shelves.
Yeah, so you had a bigger marketing plan once you went into Target, those all-star Targets that started first day?
Yeah, but we were working with a marketing freelancer, so it wasn't like a full-time employee. And, we took some scrappy tactics. I can remember they created a campaign because Target has the dots or the big dot, and it was like called Spot Us at Target. And we worked with other women-owned, minority-owned, allergy-friendly brands where we would probably have customer crossover, and we all promoted each other's brands at the same time. And so we used a lot of cost-effective methods to be able to support the business from a marketing perspective. We built out what I think was an aggressive promo schedule to make sure we came out of the gate strong from a velocity perspective. Honestly, that all went to the wayside though, because I think you can only like promote soap and hand sanitizer and toilet paper, and there were no other promotions happening in May of 2020. Stores were just trying to make sure their stores' shelves stayed stocked,
Yeah,
but we were
definitely.
prepared had it been a normal time.
What did that look like, just knowing the state of the world at that time?
Well, I think the other thing that happened, unfortunately, was George Floyd got killed at the top of May of 2020. And after that, and kind of this racial reckoning that our country started to have, there was a massive spotlight on Black owned businesses. And so the amount of inbound that we started to see and the amount of highlights that we got from publications and celebrities was unlike anything I could have ever imagined. I think for our business, that's also when we started to get more serious about how do we think about how impact and how we want to have positive impact and how we want to show up in the world. How does that manifest? Because I think for me, it was so much of a like this tragic incident happened and that our business, like, so much good happened to our business because of such a bad thing. And like, how could we channel that into something positive for more people than just our business? And so it was a really weird time because you're like stuck at home. There was so much pain and suffering. I
Yeah,
had this massive thing I needed to execute on my business. Like, it was a weird time.
yeah. How did you manage that just as a person?
Just one foot in front of the other, Roberta. There's probably a lot of trauma one day that I need to unpack from that. But like, I just, you just had to show up for your team and for your family and just kind of one foot in front of the other without really fully processing, I think, what was actually happening. Like that year, our business grew from 300 stores to 5,000 stores. Our revenue grew 10x. We grew from a team of one at the start of the year to a team of 10 at the end of the year. My daughter was at home being homeschooled. My husband was my husband was at home. We were all cramped in this small apartment. Like it was just weird times. And we were all safe and healthy and my business was doing well. And so like in the grand scheme of thing, like I was like very, very feeling very fortunate and blessed.
Yeah. That's a good note though on what you were saying, where definitely Black owned businesses were spotlighted during that time. But then as that kind of, died down, a lot of brands kind of died down at the same point. How did you manage to maintain your brand, still have the spotlight and still continue to have growth in it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a bit of whiplash because I think there was a moment where there was so much highlight and there's been, I think, a big shift in the other direction. I think we built our business on serving a consumer with food allergies, a consumer with dietary restrictions, and consumers who want better for you indulgent products. And so I don't think that necessarily has an ethnic group or a race associated with it. Like, we are still clear as day. Like there's an emblem on our box that says Black owned. We still have a fellowship program dedicated to helping HBCU students get jobs and opportunities in the CPG industry. And so like the way that we show up, I don't think has changed. But I think I built a business that wasn't just catering to one specific community or didn't rely on kind of, we talked about how the marketing strategy needed to be really holistic. I think about all things like that. Like, I feel like it's not safe to put all your eggs in one basket in any part of the business. And so for us, I think that, whether it be we had a wide breadth of investors. And so we were able to continue to go out and raise capital because being in retail, competing against massive companies is expensive. So having a wide breadth of investors to be able to go to, having a good understanding of who our consumer is and not being reliant fully on one consumer group so that we could, depending on how this macroeconomic climate ebbs and flows, like we can still have something to lean in on. And then even from a retailer perspective, not necessarily having all of our eggs in one basket. To your point, we're in 18,000 doors right now. A quarter of our business is food service alt. So we're trying to meet consumers where they live, where they work, where they play. We're on Amazon. It's like, I don't want one, there's some saying, but like one clown not stopping the show is kind of how I feel about the business. Like we got to have, and I think the juggle with that though is like, we're still a very small team. And so you still have to have a tremendous amount of focus. And what I just named is like the opposite of focus. So like, how do you focus the team on the key things, the key customers, the key products? And how do you also diversify enough so that you're not a sitting duck in case something changes?
Yeah, yeah, and you seem to be managing all of that, which is a lot.
A juggling act. It's a very bad juggling act, which is why even though you said this was a video on podcast and I intended to look much better, this is what you got today.
You look great, you look great. So you talked a second about investors, and definitely, Jay-Z Marcy's venture partners is a big one. How were you able to actually get investors? And was that always part of what you believed you needed in order to grow the business?
I remember listening to presentations at Coke when they talked about some of our venture brands, and they always would say it takes longer than you expect and costs more money than you expect. So I had always had this sense of like being in retail and really creating a national brand was going to be expensive. And I knew that I didn't have the financial wherewithal to stomach that. And so I knew that that would require some outside capital. That was definitely another reason I started small, because that was not a language I spoke. I didn't know a convertible note from a Series A, from a cap table. Like all of that was just like a foreign language to me. And so the way that we first raised money was through friends and family. And I mentioned a pretty humble upbringing. So I use that term loosely. It was a lot of supportive ex-colleagues of mine, supportive ex-colleagues of my husband's, cobbling together $5,000 and $10,000 checks to keep the business going. We met Marcy Venture Partners, and they led $1 million seed round in our business in June of 2019. And we've since gone on to raise about $30 million. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And I don't think I understood at the start of it. I conceptually thought, well, this will cost a lot of money. I didn't really know what like bringing investors into a business would mean, how much this would cost, how much time it would take up to do it. And so it's been a learning for sure.
Yeah. How did you educate yourself on it?
Some trial by fire, which I don't recommend. Mostly talking to other founders who had been there, exited founders. I think other conversations that were super helpful. Like I feel like oftentimes when people are looking for mentors and advice, they look to the people who like seemingly have done the best job at it. I will say I find a tremendous amount of value in the conversations with the people maybe whose businesses didn't go as planned or who failed, because like oftentimes there's like things outside of your control. It's like timing and luck and a bunch of other stuff that factors into whether a business is successful or not. And so having conversations with people whose businesses hadn't turned out the way they expected also was a very big lesson. And like, well, what would they have done differently? Because I think when things are going really well, it's easy to say, oh, just do this. And like to skirt aside some of the details. Whereas like if something's gone wrong, you kind of remember everything you wish you would have done differently.
Yeah, yeah. So with that, what has been the hardest part about being an entrepreneur and having your own brand in such a big way?
The hardest part, I would bucket. I think there's a few hard parts. I think the financing piece, I think we've all heard the dismal stats around women, around Black women raising capital. I think less than 2% of venture capital goes to women, less than 0.5% goes to Black women. And so to continually walk into rooms and try to raise capital, knowing that the deck is stacked so far against you, that's definitely been a challenge. Team, that's definitely hard too. Understanding how the team needs to evolve, how to nurture the team, how to build culture in a remote environment. Like that's definitely been a challenge. I think the balancing of it all and the loneliness of it. Like I think as you continue to scale your business, there's only so many people who have gotten a business to certain points, and like having someone who's been there and done that, and then ideally someone who's had similar lived experiences and may look like you, like finding somebody who fits that that and can like tell you like it's going to be okay and it's normal to go through this. Like sometimes you don't get that and that's pretty lonely and scary. So I would say those have been some of the bigger challenges.
Yeah. Do you have mentors that you kind of lean into to help?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody can be a mentor. As cheesy as it sounds, like I swear sometimes my daughter gives me the best advice. Like she'll like I was like it's like common sense. Or like, I think of like my colleagues, like somebody just because they're not like in charge, like oftentimes I feel like the most junior employees know the most about what's going on or not going on. I talk to friends who are in the industry. I talk to friends who aren't in the industry. I kind of look at everybody as a potential mentor.
Yeah. You even still listen to your customers. I read something
Oh,
about
yes.
you.
I literally read every single customer service message to my team's dismay because they're like, you should be doing other things. But like, I think that is the most important voice to listen to. Without your customers, you don't have a business. So I need to know and I want to know what they're saying, what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, yeah. So you talked a second about the 501c3. Can you give a little bit more color around that?
So we started the 501c3 Black Futures Fellowship in 2020. After George Floyd was killed, we experienced a lot of positive impact in our business. And then when I looked around, the room was full of people who did not look like me. And then when I thought back on my experiences at Coke and I thought about how, I'd say if I was ever an entrepreneur and I had to hire a team, it would be super diverse. And when I became an entrepreneur and I went to hire a team and I looked through resumes, they were a lot more homogenous than I wanted them to be. And I was like, well, how do we give students access to the education, to the mentorship, to the sponsorship that they need to be successful in this industry, to even understand what the opportunities are in the industry? I remember, when I was at Carolina, I thought if you worked in CPG, you were a brand manager. I didn't think about food safety or quality or sales or operate. Like there's so many things that are required for a company to run. I was like, how do we give students access to that education at an earlier stage to hopefully change the future of what this industry looks like? And so we started the program in 2020. We've now turned it into a 501c3 that's backed by some of our key retail partners. And it's really aimed at giving HBCU students the access and opportunities to have an impact in the food industry.
I love that too because you focused on initially supporting your daughter, giving her, what she needed in regards to quality food, but also like supporting the brand with a mission and being more vocal with that just based on what you've experienced in the growth of your brand.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what are next steps for the brand? Any exciting launches or retail expansions happening? You're kind of in every retailer, I feel like, with 18,000 retail. I'm like, how many other stores can you be?
I think about it as like I bucket it into like more distribution. And so not necessarily more stores, but where I want to be anywhere where a consumer actually needs our product. And so whether that's an amusement park, whether that's an airline, whether that's an office or a school, I think you'll see us show up in more locations with more products. Because as much as I'd like to believe someone can live off of cookies, probably not the best thing. And so you're going to see us show up supporting other parts of the day with other snacking occasions as well. And then I think as our business grows, my hope is that like we started out as a certified B Corp, we remain a certified B Corp. My hope is that like our positive impact only continues to grow as the business grows.
Yeah, great. And then where can our listeners follow, support, and buy Partake?
You can follow us across any social media platform at the handle Partake Foods. And you can find us on Amazon as well as, to your point, Roberta, in 18,000 stores. So Target and Walmart and Kroger and Whole Foods and all the retail partners that we're so grateful for.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Denise, for coming on and telling your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.